Okay, so thank you everybody and good afternoon to all of our attendees from CAG. Thank you for joining us today for this installment of the CAG Innovation Series in partnership with OurCrowd. Today we're going to talk about opportunities amidst the COVID crisis. And before we start diving into the agenda and a lot of the of what we're going to hear today and some housekeeping rules, I want to introduce our first speaker for welcoming words. Just a second. Bernard Siu, the Vice President of Innovation at CAG. Bernard, you can take it away.
Hi, colleagues. Bernard here. Great to have all you all online. We are starting this webinar series. This is something that we are pioneering with our crowd for CAG colleagues. As you can see in the slide in front of you, we are aiming to organize a series of webinars along these three themes: current affairs, so-called current trends. For example, today's session, opportunities amid the COVID pandemic. We also have some webinars that's skewed more towards like innovation masterclasses. For example, getting some innovation experts in or our crowd members to come in to walk through with us how to craft a problem statement, how to work effectively with startups. And there will also be another team, which is kind of like what we call technology deep dives, right? Kind of like what are the solutions or technology solutions in the market, and we have a bit of our information session, not unlike our startup pitches, but it's more like a information deep dive. And this could include like AGV, robotic operations, drones, AI, video analytics. So we have quite a series of webinars lined up for us in this coming year. About every month or so, we will have a webinar, and this is but the first session to kick it off. So without further ado, thanks for taking time out in a very busy December work month for us to join us. I hope that this will be informative and hopefully insightful for you as well. With that, maybe I hand it back to Yaka.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And I will be your MC for today, and let's just dive into it. And I want to introduce to you the agenda that we have for today. So the entire session for today is 1 hour and 15 minutes, maybe a bit less depending on how active you'll be with the Q&A, but hopefully we'll have a very vivid discussion afterwards after each presentation. So we are done with the welcoming words, and we're going to jump straight into our first speaker, Dan Fishel. Dan is the VP of Business Development at OurCrowd, and he's going to talk about different previous test cases from previous crises, actually bringing us up to speed with everything that happened before COVID and in the beginning of COVID. Afterwards, we're going to move to Aviv Alper from SNC. Aviv is Senior Director of Research, and she is going to give us the broad picture and the overview of trends and technology trends from the Israeli ecosystem. And our third speaker is Stephan Chouchan, the Country Director for ST Microelectronics and the Founder and General Manager of ST Accelerator. Stephan is going to talk to us about a multinational, the experience of multinationals working in innovation in Israel and how were they affected by COVID. And then we're going to end with a few ending notes. Just a few housekeeping rules before we kick everything off and move on to Dan. I would like to ask everyone on this session, all the attendees, to maybe take a second to rename yourself on Zoom. You can click the button of participants, then click more and rename. For the renaming, please use your first name and last name, and then afterwards put your department in parentheses. That's for the kind of technical aspect. In terms of live participation, during the segment, you can issue questions, in the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen right now. You can test it right now. Those that Q&A function will be used by us after each speaker has ended his presentation to ask him questions live, and if anyone wants to his questions to be answered live, please mention that. During the session itself, specifically during Dan's presentation, we will have live polls. Dan is going to make use of live polls, so please do pay attention. These are very interactive, and are very helpful for the discussion. So without any further ado, I want to kick things off by introducing our first speaker. As I mentioned before, Dan Fishel is the Vice President of Business Development at OurCrowd. Dan, you should have control of the screen right now, and definitely take it away.
Thank you, Yakir. Good afternoon. I'm not sure I'm controlling the screen now. Now I am. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Let's go back a little bit. Always blame technology. I'm blaming it now. Okay. Okay, just pressing too quickly, latency. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take the next 20 minutes to talk about what's happening right now and why innovation at times of crisis is more important than ever before. And I'm going to start with a bold statement. We are facing a Darwinian moment in corporate history. The next 5 to 10 years, we're going to witness a redistribution between corporate winners and corporate losers. The winners are those that will have adapted faster to a radically different technological environment that is undergoing right now. The losers are those corporations that have been slow to adopt change before COVID and are still slow to adopt change during and maybe even after COVID. Now, why is this important? Because McKinsey has found out that corporations that invest in innovation at times of crisis, they outperform the S&P 500 by up to 30% during recovery. This is 2008 crisis data. Now, why is this data more important than ever before? Because the lifespan of S&P 500 companies is decreasing, and is decreasing radically from 60 years to less than 20 today, to just about 12 in a few years from now. Now, there is a little chat box on the bottom of your screen. This is an interactive session. If you're not participating, you can just watch the recording. So please take advantage of the medium and let's participate in this discussion. And I'm going to ask you, and please type your question, your answer, your opinion. Why is the lifespan of S&P 500 companies decreasing? So take a moment, think about it. Just type your answer. Why is it decreasing? And by decreasing, I don't mean the companies die. I don't mean they go out of business. I mean they're simply becoming less relevant for the index. So make sure you send to all panelists and attendees. Take a second. Why the lifespan is decreasing? Let's give it exactly 5 seconds. And if you don't tell me the answer, I'm going to reveal it to you. Okay, so the answer is simple, 2 words. It's called technology disruption. Basically introducing a product to market that renders all previous products obsolete. Think about the iPhone disrupting all previous phones. Now, technology disruption on its own is nothing new. It's been with us since the Industrial Revolution. You know, the car disrupted the horse. What is new is the pace in which it's happening. Take a look at this chart. It took Americans 50 years to adopt electricity in their homes. It took them less than 10 to adopt the smartphone. So this was before COVID. What's happening during COVID is an exponential acceleration of tech adoption. And this is already yesterday's slide. Everyone knows it. We all feel it. An acceleration of digitization. Out of the sudden, everyone is digital. Governments are digital. Insurance companies, banks, you don't have to go physically to a bank to open an account in many, many countries in the world. Out of the sudden, you can do it from the convenience of your homes. Brick and mortar stores are becoming digital. And it all happened overnight, literally in terms of technology evolution overnight. But some things are dramatically different in this technology acceleration. The first thing is it is reaching new demographics. Never before the elderly were so digital as they are now. And it's changing consumer behaviors from the very, very core. If you're a corporation, it's also, we're going to see a shift towards cloud technologies, though that haven't still moved to a private cloud, would do so because the on-prem IT infrastructure is simply not designed to work from home. Now, even the Microsoft CEO was putting it in perfect words, and he was saying that in April, that they've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in just 2 months. So when COVID is over, and it looks like it's going to be over within the next year, are we going back? Banks would turn back to not being as digital as they are now. Governments, probably not, right? Not in a single instance in human history, tech adoption has reversed. And if we were to qualitatively put on this chart what's happening right now, I put it as a straight line up, the digitization of what isn't digital. But the acceleration of the digitization we all feel, it's part of our daily lives. What we don't feel just yet is the impact on automation. And by automation, I mean the process by which humans are replaced by machines. Now, intuitively, we tend to think about this as a straight line. Every year, more humans are replaced by more machines. But this is wrong, because history shows us, the last 3 recessions show us that automation actually happens in spikes. It's not a straight line, it just spikes, and it's centered around economic crisis. Now, why is that? Because the relative cost of labor of a corporation goes up when its revenues go down. So what do corporations do? They simply lay off employees. Now, what type of employees have lost their jobs in the past 3 recessions and also now? Surprisingly or not, the vast majority of them are low income, routine jobs that can be easily automated. And those people that have lost their jobs in the past and are losing their jobs right now are simply replaced with a mix of technology and highly skilled workers. You can see on the right, the 2008 data. Following the 2008 recession, there was a spike in the demand to employees that are better educated, have more experience, and most importantly, have better computer skills. Now, here is the mind-blowing data. And this is US data, but it applies to many developed economies. The automation potential in the US workforce is double digit. It's actually 46% on average. 46% of jobs in the US can be automated. Doesn't mean they will be automated, but they can be automated. And this is the Brookings Institution data. It's on par with McKinsey and many, many other research firms. Now take a look at the most interesting part here, the accommodation and food services, the jobs that are most prone for disruption by automation. 73% automation potential. And these are exactly the same people that have lost their jobs during the crisis. Hotel workers, restaurant workers. Now, what is different in this recession? There's one thing that is there's a major difference, and I would say a radical difference, and it is not just the number of people that have lost their job, which is by several orders of magnitude higher than in any of the previous recessions. But for the first time, humans have the ability, the technological ability to replace other humans, not just in manual labor, but also in cognitive skills. It's called AI, machine learning, deep learning. These technologies that again can replace insurance agents with bots, that can replace radiologists deciphering MRI scans, are going to take a major step in the evolution of technology over the next 5 to 10 years. AI is still early stage. We all hear AI here, AI there, but it's still an early stage technology. It was super early stage in 2008. It was theoretical in 2000. It was science fiction in 1991, and it is going to change the world the way we know it. Now, when we're looking at this new world, we have to kind of start thinking in terms of different terms. One term is an acceleration. We all understand what it means. For example, it's an increase in the adoption rate of existing technologies. Think about banks. The digitization technologies were already on the shelf. They just needed to be adopted. They just needed to be implemented. What COVID is causing an increase in transformation rate. By transformation, I mean application of new technologies to solve a certain problem, or repurposing of existing technology from another sector to solve a certain problem in a certain industry. Think about air travel. You know, many airports around the world have to transition to transform from regular airport security to biosecurity. And this is very quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, the way we see different sectors on the transformation versus acceleration axis. Now, the key to growth post-COVID is innovation. And there's two types of innovation. There's incremental innovation, which is basically transitioning from a 3-blade razor to a 5-blade razor. We all understand that. But there's something that's called disruptive innovation, which is basically what Netflix did to the DVD and what Spotify did to the CD. They rendered them obsolete. So here's a quick poll question for you. I just listed 4 of the brands that are currently present in Changi Airport. And please answer this question. Who are their main competitors? Is it another big corporation? Are there SMBs? Are there startups? Maybe none of the above. Almost all of you said startups. Now, it's actually right. It's a good answer, because if, by the way, and you are uncommon. It's an uncommon reply, because when I ask this question, most people actually say it's another large corporation. And those people that say it's another large corporation, they think about innovation in an incremental way. You know, my competitor is the other big competitors, but reality is that disruptive innovation almost never comes from another large corporation. It comes from many competitors that are very, very small, and they are very, very hard to see. And they are called startups, and they are very, very hungry. And they, specialize in just one little thing, and that one little thing they do really, really well. If you're in a bank, there's startups that do loans and mortgages and SMBs and services and credit, etc. Disrupting insurance companies. If you're an insurance company, as I said before, they replaced agents with bots. OurCrowd invested in Lemonade. This is exactly what they're doing. And as a group, they go after every single line of business of a corporation and simply disrupting them. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts, because the startups, they really know what they're doing. Many of them will fail, but those who don't eventually become the Google and the Facebook of an industry. No. So 75% of them is saying no. And that's kind of, that's funny, right? It's embedded on your phone. This is how you got it. It's from the box already. How come you're not using Apple Maps? And the answer is simple. All we have to go is back to 2012, when Apple Maps was launched, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster. When you were looking for, in the maps, for London, you would get London in Ontario, Canada. If you were looking for the Tokyo main railway station, you wouldn't find it. It simply wouldn't be there. Not to mention that car navigation didn't work properly. So what Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, did at the time, he released a statement saying, listen, dear customers, dear users, we screwed up. For now, go and download Google Maps and go download Waze. Now, Waze at the time was an Israeli startup, quite anonymous, and they became a phenomenon overnight. Massive downloads. Everyone started using Waze. It was such a big phenomenon that a year later, this company, the small startup based in Israel, was sold to Google for over $1 billion, and they are still a market leader in car navigation. So this is a classic textbook example how one startup can disrupt a giant, even if that giant is a big technology firm. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because if you're looking at the way tech transformed our lives just in the past 10 years, there's no better indication than this. If you're looking at the top 10 publicly traded companies by market cap in 2010, just 10 years ago, only 2 were technology companies, Apple and Microsoft. If you're looking at the same list now, the top 7 out of the 10 are technology companies, the top 7. And while number 8, Warren Buffett, is selling all of his stock in shares in airlines, taking a huge loss, these companies are making huge profits. But let's take a closer look at these companies. They're 28 years old on average. There were startups just yesterday. So most of the disruptive innovation that has brought to us in the past 10 years has been coming from these companies. Their impact on our daily lives can be on par or even greater than the one of our own government. And if you're looking at the revenue, the crazy revenue they're delivering, beating analyst expectations quarter over quarter at times of the biggest economic crisis the world has ever seen. If you're looking at Israel, a record year, a record quarter in investments in startups, why is this happening? Why is this happening? How is it possible? The technology is thriving while the rest of the economy is crumbling. And the answer is very simple. Technology is the only vaccine to COVID. And I'm not talking about Pfizer and Moderna and the mRNAs of the world. This is also a lot of technology. It's an amazing human achievement. I'm talking about simple technology to keep our economy going. What do we need to keep our economy going? We need, a solid internet speed so we can, do our business. We need remote work software like this one that is cheap, easily available. We need e-commerce so we can order things to our homes. Can you imagine what would have happened if COVID were to strike in 2008? There was no Zoom, there was basically Skype, very limited, no screen sharing. Can you imagine what would have happened in 1991? There was not even the internet. So probably 2 things would have happened. Either we would, stay at home, starve to death, so probably not an option, or we'd be forced to, work as normal and take a much bigger toll in human lives. So if I were to leave you just with one slide from this presentation, is the McKinsey slide. The time to invest in innovation is right now. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, right now. I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, Yakir, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Let's see if we have any questions. I do see a question in the Q&A function. So I'll read it out loud, or do you want to read it? Let's do it. Let me read it so everybody would be on sync, and then you can answer it. So you mentioned that there is disruptive innovation and there is incremental innovation. Netflix was an example of disruptive innovation. Netflix may have been seen as disruptive today, but Netflix started with an incremental innovation from DVD rental shops. By decentralizing the physical shop and using snail mail instead with normal DVDs, then only later transitioned to pure online. They didn't jump straight from DVD to pure online model. Is there ever really such a thing as disruptive innovation, or is disruptive innovation just when we forget the intermediate incremental steps and only see the big before and after?
I think that's a great way to look at incremental versus disruptive. I think you can look at any type of innovation as incremental if there's no victims in the process. I think the victims of Netflix are very clear. There's no more DVD shops anywhere in the world. I think there's only maybe one somewhere in the US. There's one last Blockbuster left. Oh, I think actually they closed even that one. So when something is disruptive, it means that it makes others obsolete. In that case, Netflix is a classic example of how it simply made, all DVD stores obsolete. You cannot even, probably the entire medium of DVDs is not even existent. Who's buying a DVD now to watch at home? They simply erased the category. And I think, yes, you're right. In disruptive innovation, many times comes in incremental steps, sometimes not. In the case of Netflix, it simply was an evolution. They came up with a better business model compared to the regular DVD shops. Actually, the blockbusters were penalizing people for being late to return DVDs. That was actually their main source of revenue. Netflix didn't. You could have kept the DVDs, as much as you wanted. Just paid a monthly subscription. And when the bandwidth was good enough, and they managed to get all the rights with the studios, they simply jumped to the next step, which is streaming, and that was the real disruption. I hope it answers the question.
Terrific. Thank you, Dan. I don't see any other questions, and actually it's right on time. So with that, I would like to thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing this with us. If anyone has additional questions to Dan, please do forward them to your innovation team, to Trish or Bernard, and they can forward it to us, and we will have Dan reply to them later on. So thank you, Dan. If I could, I would like to address that question. I think also adding on what Dan mentioned before we move on to our next speaker, when you're looking at disruptive innovation versus incremental innovation, what we're seeing today in Israel is that startups that strive, the startups that actually achieve higher valuations, higher traction, are the ones that are disruptive from the get-go. These are not startups that started with incremental innovation, meaning their first product, their first go-to-market, most of the time is actually very much disruptive. And if that's not the case, they've actually go through a few iterations. So it's really an interesting view on the Israeli ecosystem. But the Israeli ecosystem is, of course, enriched by a lot of disruptive startups. And with that, that's actually a great segue into our next speaker, Aviv Alper. Aviv is the Senior Director of Research at Startup Nation Central. And Aviv is going to share with us today data-backed insights into the Israeli ecosystem in the period of COVID. How were startups affected, and how were specific sectors and verticals affected by the COVID crisis? Aviv, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now so you can upload your screen.
Thank you.
Terrific. Great. So we can see your screen and you can take it away.
So thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon. My name is Aviv Alper. I'm the Senior Director of Research at Startup Nation Central. Startup Nation Central is a non-profit organization that's serving as a gateway to the Israeli innovation. We connect business, government, and NGO leaders from around the world with the Israeli innovation ecosystem, which means startups, entrepreneurs, and investors. And I'd like to start with the title of today's session, which was Opportunities Amidst the COVID-19 Crisis. So did the Israeli high-tech experience the crisis during 2020? Dan already approached slightly this question, and he showed you the great performance of the Israeli high-tech during 2020. And we analyzed the numbers of the last years and saw that actually 2020 was a record year. It continued the growth trend that we see in previous years. And this is outstanding information while the entire world is going under a crisis. So one may say that maybe it's because of the demand for technology, and this is an international phenomena for high tech around the world. But looking at the segmentation of investments by area, we see that the growth in Israel was actually quite unique. Now, how can this be explained? So I will start with things that Dan mentioned, and the pandemic accelerates the transition into the new digital age. Digitization processes were obviously already in demand prior to the outbreak of the pandemic, but the new circumstances created a true incentive to foster these processes. Everything and everyone is on the internet. We work on the internet, we learn, we do online shopping, we meet our doctor with Zoom meetings or over the phone or with smart applications. And it's not only that we spend more time on the internet, it's also that more populations are now using the internet much more widely than they did before. Now, in addition, the physical distance created a need for virtual proximity, meaning for new technologies that will give us the feeling that we still close one to the other, all through technology, all through screens. And this is an opportunity for startup and technologies in this domain to shine and to meet the new demand. Now, the third factor that I want to mention is the resilience. Multinationals and manufacturers all over the world now prioritize resilience over growth. What they want is to keep the business running. Now, machines are obviously more resilient than humans. And here we see, and I'll get to it in little more details later during this presentation, and we see more and more robotics and machines being applied into workplaces in order to give this resilience to businesses that looking to continue to act as much as they can as business as usual. Now, as I said, this is true globally, but how Israel gets into the picture. So we have a live and kicking startup scene here in Israel with the highest density of startups in the world per capita. We have over 6,000 startups operating here, and they fueled by over 200 VC funds, Israeli VC funds that operate in Israel, and in addition receive, as I said, funding from all over the world. This is combined with incubators and accelerators that help early stage startups to grow. And there's a very significant role of multinational companies. There are over 350 R&D centers in Israel of foreign companies. And this is especially important during COVID times because although Israel is far from the main markets, the MNCs, the headquarters is obviously in other countries, they see the needs. They see what their clients need, what the customers need, and they actually the one that making the bridge between the global need and the Israeli solutions. So their presence here in Israel helps Israeli companies during the crisis, and I'll get to it in a second, to adjust their solutions, to pivot to meet the new demand and the new circumstances. And it's a lot being done a lot by those MNCs. I won't get into the universities and the tech transfer offices, but I will just say that the Israeli innovation is highly connected to technologies, to deep tech technologies being developed by academics. And this is another unique feature of what we have here in Israel. Now, Israel is well positioned to benefit from this new digital age. I will focus on a few elements and how they are relevant to COVID times. So first, the entrepreneurial culture in Israel is lean toward risk-taking. Israel is a nation of immigrants, people who left everything behind and they started new life here in Israel. This is important because now we're speaking about times of uncertainty, and the startups that shine are the ones that are quick to take the risk, to go to the unknown, to try new things, and to take the opportunity to pivot and to change. Now, the other thing is the data and software deep tech focus, and again, Dan mentioned it briefly. Here in Israel, the AI expertise, the big data, the cybersecurity, these are the elements that stands behind the innovation that comes from the state of Israel. And the multidisciplinary approach. So one can have a technology, develop a technology in AI and to apply the technology in the area of enterprise solutions. But now in times when we see that necessities is higher in healthcare, so sometimes same technology with some adaptations can be relevant to a different sector. And we see in Israel very high mobility between sectors. So one does not have to create this entire career around a specific sector, but actually we see this mobility, and it's something that is very common here in Israel. And all these together create the agility and flexibility of the ecosystem. Now let's take a look maybe about the numbers, and I want to demonstrate this with the historical research that we've done regarding AI startups here in Israel. And what we saw, we took the entire decade, and what you see here, the green line shows the Google trend of the hype around the AI technology. And the deep blue is the share of Israeli startups that were established and that they focus on AI. And you see that Israel was quick to adapt the new technology. So already in 2015, you see large proportion of AI startups. And also that in global comparison, the green bars that you see are the one of other ecosystems in the world. So you see that Israel has much higher portion of startups in the area of AI. So this one graph shows both the quick adoption and also give you some perspective into the importance of deep tech technology like AI in Israeli startups. Now, how this agility came into life during COVID, we already mapped from March 2020 until today, over 300 startups that harness their technology specifically to deal with COVID-19 challenges. It could be either directly around the area of vaccine or air purification, how to eliminate the contamination, but it also could be indirectly, and I'll touch upon it when we'll speak about digital healthcare. Many startups understood that their solution could be relevant, for example, to help and load the burden on hospitals or point of cares by keeping more people at home and giving them the same services they could get at the clinic and get it at home. So many startups are operating I would say, the periphery of the COVID-19 challenges. We also see it in mental health, for example, in silver tech technologies that are addressing seniors and to help them to deal with the fact that the loneliness is becoming higher during lockdowns. So we see many startups that are already doing or pivots or giving new solutions to adjust to the new circumstances. Now, a few words about sectors and about verticals. What we did is we analyzed important and significant sectors in the Israeli high-tech ecosystem according to the current strengths and to the projected change in demand that we see during the COVID-19 crisis. And I will focus on a few of the sectors, but before, just to give you a sense of what you see in this graph. What you see, the size of the circle, is how big this sector is currently in the Israeli ecosystem. So you see digital healthcare, cybersecurity and fintech are very large sectors as of today. You see smart mobility, agri-food tech, and advertising technology, I would say, in the second tier in terms of size. And other notable sectors that we wanted to mention here is education, Industry 4.0, and travel tech, which are smaller in size, but yet have a specific relevance to the pandemic. Now, what you see on the y-axis is a change in demand. Now, obviously, travel tech is an industry that suffered dramatically from less demand during the crisis. Advertising technology, ad tech, is also an industry where we see some decline, mainly because the clients, the customers, have less budgets for advertisement in some industries, while others that get more online actually put some more money to get into the online world. But all in all, we do see a decrease in demand there. And now I will focus on four of the sectors to give you also a glance of what we see within each of them. I will start with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity had an outstanding year in terms of investments in 2020. Over $2.5 billion were invested in Israeli cybersecurity companies. the two leading subsectors that we see in cybersecurity flourishing these days are network security and applications and website security. Again, because so many of the international activity of businesses becomes online, so there's also more room for hackers, obviously, and more opportunities for them to try and access the data, and you probably see it in the news each and every day. And therefore, we see more and more investments of companies in their cyber security applications. And Israeli companies really take a big chunk of the global demand in this, or the global supply, sorry, in this area. So this was one leading super relevant element where Israel has years of excellence. The second area where we see growth this year is digital healthcare. In digital healthcare, as I mentioned, we see both direct and indirect effects of the COVID-19 on the companies. One area that is flourishing is diagnostics. There's many Israeli companies that deal with diagnostics, some of them specifically with COVID-19. Actually, there were almost 10 new companies that were founded in the last 6 months specifically to diagnose COVID-19. But many others are relevant indirectly because they help to diagnose other diseases and to keep, as I said, people at home and to give the patient an option to stay at home or to go to the a nearby clinic and not getting to the big medical centers where people want to avoid the crowded hospitals. Now, the second area that is flourishing in Israel these days is remote monitoring within digital healthcare. In remote monitoring, we're speaking about a way to make sure that the patients are being constantly monitored. Again, it could be either at home or in the hospitals or in the clinics themselves, but without a human or a physical interaction. It's all being done by apps, by technologies, by devices, smart devices. So we also see here a transition of medical devices companies into the area of digital healthcare. There is some shared element between the two, the devices and the digital element, and we see more and more companies that combine the hardware and software together. So this area is pretty strong in Israel, and we will publish at the end of January a specific report about the performance of digital healthcare in Israel in 2020 amidst the COVID-19 situation. Now, the third sector that we see, where we see a growth in, is fintech. Fintech and also e-commerce. More and more businesses are getting online, and the demand for mobile payments and online payments is becoming bigger. Israel in this area, again, has a record of years of experience and many strong and big companies, what we call the unicorns, companies with high valuation, even if these are private and not public companies. So the area of payments is really booming. And the second area is anti-fraud, which again is some related to cybersecurity, how to keep all those transactions, to keep the transactions safe, and to make sure that the identification of the buyers or the sellers is being done accurately with no fraud involved. The fourth and last sector that I want to touch upon is Industry 4.0, or it could be also called advanced manufacturing. So this one is a tricky one. We haven't seen in 2020 a growth in investments in Industry 4.0. Actually, 2019 was better in terms of investment for the Israeli Industry 4.0 sector. Compared to the other three that I mentioned, where we really saw the growth, in Industry 4.0, the situation is more complex. On one hand, there are factories and and businesses that were shut down for some of this period. They had to keep their cash flow for the more maybe urgent business operations, and therefore did not have the cash to invest in innovation. So this is on one hand, but on the other hand, we do see that manufacturers and industrial, other industrial entities, some of them, as I mentioned, resilience as a key factor, start to actually invest more in technology, in innovation, in order to keep the business running also in times of lockdown, or because of movement restrictions that people cannot, that the employees cannot come to the workspace. And therefore, we do see that in some segments in operations optimization, there's a growth, how to make sure that the business is as efficient as possible. And also in industrial robotics, as I mentioned, more human and machine interaction, how machines can support humans when the employees, maybe they stay at home and remotely they operate through machines that are installed in the factory. In Industry 4.0, so we don't see maybe currently the overall growth, but we do believe that this will be a leading segment in 2021 as the economy will start to recover. And by this, I will end and just invite you, if you want to look out for Israeli specific technologies. We have an online innovation discovery platform. It's called Finder, Startup Nation Finder. And in the Finder, we map the entire ecosystem. You can see the listing of over all the 6,000 Israeli startups by area, by technology, by sector. And we welcome you to use this tool and to interact with Israeli startups. Thank you. Are there any questions that I can address?
Terrific. Yeah, I actually see a few questions. So let's start off with actually a question about the POCs. Do you have any data showing what's happening with POCs currently in Israel? And maybe if you can answer, like, how did startups and MNCs mitigated the problem of not being able to travel? How do people try do those in these days?
So this is a great question, and this is a real challenge, and this is something that we discussed with many startups in the previous months. Also did a survey among Israeli companies. What we saw there was very interesting. Because Israel is far from the market, so many startups already had, prior to the outbreak of the pandemic, solutions for a remote installation. And the ones that did not have it yet developed those models. So we definitely see that companies take this seriously. They put resources on developing those new models of remote installations. They build guides, how to guide the local teams on spot, how to help them remotely to install themselves. We also see collaboration between companies. There are many Israeli companies that do have some kind of presence in the market. So even if one startup not necessarily has a representative, they can use or can be helped by representative of other company and actually work together. So one person can install for several different startups. So we see, I think, nicely this collaboration. Obviously, this is a challenge. This is something companies are dealing with. I would just say that the ones that made it and found those new models, this is something that will actually help them also once the economy will recover. Because once you have this model and it operates in a good way, then you can actually scale your installations dramatically. So yes, we do see the companies that made this transition, and there are others that having a hard time because of it. By the way, the early stage startups, the young startups are the ones that suffer more from the pandemic. And they are the ones that have less resources, and they are the ones that might suffer also in the long term, have harder time to deal with the new circumstances, but the mature companies are really doing well, also with the POCs.
I think it's very interesting, Aviv, because you can look at it as if remote POCs is like remote work, like remote working from home. It's a trend that people dabbled with it in the past, but now it's a must. So it's kind of accelerating that trend. If you want to have a successful POC and actually have a POC, you need to have it remotely. So that's a very interesting point. And I see here 3 additional questions. I want to ask one of them because I believe 2 of them would be more suitable for maybe our next speaker, for the multinational that speaks. So given COVID reality, did POCs become a luxury saved for software companies, or are you also witnessing POCs of hardware companies during these times?
This is an interesting question. What we see, and this is maybe part of the uniqueness of the Israeli ecosystem. Also, the hardware companies in Israel, many of them has some kind of software element. Israel is stronger in software than in hardware. It's true that we have some expertise or in specific the area of sensors, but this is again usually integrated into hardware software companies. So we speak about this mix. Obviously, for hardware, for solely hardware companies, there is decline now in the amount of POCs. The software ones are the ones that are the first to adjust to this new reality. And again, what I said about partnerships is something that hardware companies, they use it, the partnership with companies that already have representatives abroad. But definitely it's easier for software companies, and for the mixed companies are also the ones that made them the leapfrog. But for hardware companies, the situation is more difficult. Absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you, Aviv. I think with that we can conclude. Thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Just a second. Terrific. So our third speaker, we saved last but definitely not least. That's what I want to say. We have Stephan Chouchan. Stephan is the country director from ST Microelectronics, and he's also the founder and general manager of ST Up, ST Microelectronics accelerator. Stephan, thank you for joining us today. Let me share the control of the screen with you, so you would be able to also control the slides. You should have control right now. Terrific.
Thank you. Thank you, Yakir. Thank you to everyone this morning, this afternoon, because we are also in Singapore. So yes, a few years ago, I will say almost 20 years ago, ST came in Israel. By the way, just only having innovation here in Israel, you probably heard, and thank you to Dan and Aviv this morning for explaining us what is the ecosystem of Israel and also what is the startup nation. But I want to show you an example of a crystallization of a big multinational corporate coming in Israel. By the way, Israel and Singapore are taking into example with a lot of similarity. When we learn MBA, for example, these two countries during the last 100 years, let's say, increase their innovation and their economy in the same way. They are very similar. So when we are talking about now startups nation, sometimes scale-up nation, it is very much more related to this kind of countries with a very high level of disruptive approach to their market. So having to say that, you can see that ST 3 years ago started from this assessment. And by the way, who we are, you probably know, we are a big corporate, a big public company that have been created more than 30 years ago by the merge of SGS and Thomson Semiconductors. This company has a lot of expenditures in R&D. You can see 1.5 billion spent each year, and big facilities in terms of manufacturing and also in terms of resources in order to serve our customers around the world. We have in Israel an R&D side, sales and marketing side, and lastly, an accelerator. So we are focusing mainly on electronics. I will say today, to put a bit nuance to what Aviv said before, even if Israel is seen as a software country, the frontier between hardware and software is now blurring. With the, let's say, with the coming from the algorithmic approach of how to develop new systems. And this is the way that even today, sensor in automotive or in industrial markets, or MPUs, or let's say semiconductors component in personal electronics and communication is coming. So with this approach, we decided a few years ago to open this accelerator. And it's important to have, as a big corporate, in an innovation activity in Israel, because having an independent structure, not related to one BU especially, or having an agile and robust process in order to attack, to self-adapt to this ecosystem is very important. I want to say that the continuous innovation that we have here is a main factor of having a big corporate, let's say, joining forces, and not to be only the big corporate and the startup. To take again the image Dan put with the fishes is very interesting and pictorial. But I would say I will have changed a bit the picture, not having the small fishes, let's say, chasing the big one. But by the way, fishes, if you know, are chasing each other face to face. So when you take a fish in a mouth of another, you will see that the fish that captured the fish, he captured it from the face and not from the tail. So I will say this is exactly what we have in Israel. So to be flexible, to have the DNA to think out of the box is important. But big corporates saw also very pragmatic elements in Israel. You know, big corporate have to enrich their value proposition. And this is about, let's say, having innovative and disruptive technology coming from startups. You know, Israel is a startup nation, but with a lot of technological competencies, but you need to have also this kind of, let's say, joint or cooperative approach if you want to success. So very naturally serving our customer, and we have over 400 in Israel, with a large distribution network, because we came before, as you can see, we came in 2001, and then we acquired an R&D center, and a company that became our R&D center for MEMS. And then we go back to innovation. So today the profile of the accelerator is a very nice profile, because we give access to technology. We gave access to BU. We gave access to a strategic partner. By the way, a few examples, if you can have in mind Mobileye or Valence or big company that have developed this chip with us from the very beginning, and making this kind of approach. So again, multinationals oftenly think about what to do and then to do it. In Israel, you have to learn by doing. You have to be very fast, very pragmatic, and also not trying to copy paste best practice or to rule the ecosystem, but much more to cooperate. You know, some of big company are doing this with audit cabinet. You have to be present in Israel. Better to be flexible, to participate as a game player, to be local and empowered people. This is very important. Not being, you know, in remote control, and to take risk. This has been said before. To be bold. This is important because most of the time big corporate want to avoid doing mistakes. Mistakes is part of the process. You know, in Italian we say chi va piano va sano. In Israel, chi va piano va piano. We will not say, we will not do. So we have to jump into the cold water and to try. And this is the business target we put in place by this kind of model. You can see the system on a chip approach, or the system in a model approach, or the IP licensing or product definition. This is very interesting that have been learned from the past success stories and implemented for the future. So when you see this kind of approach, again, it is turned around technology and how much the COVID-19 impact of this innovation activity. We could say that in Israel, the technology industry showed the ability of change during a very fast direction and very flexible during this period of time. And a lot of startups offered the new technology and relevant approach to the pandemic crisis in order to fight this crisis. And this is very important. And we understood that, for example, we put in place last month a digital health challenge in order to, according our KPI, to detect the new startup that we join force and will, let's say, combine their IP or their algorithm to our components. And this is very interesting because the new challenge coming up to face the COVID, coming from new technology, I started even before the crisis. So we saw in the past that we have to transform health or wellness through a pandemic crisis. But this year has been definitively a very harsh model of how to adapt ourselves. But we saw opportunity in this with the new sensors, deep learning. We talk about artificial intelligence, structure, and new MPU, and also the way of working remotely. The digital transformation we see today is even taking more and more place in our life. So we have to rethink the fact to communicate, to lead. Here you are. Today we are doing event through not Waze, but Zoom. A very nice mistake. And we don't have so much international exchange. So it's limiting the way we cooperate, but now we can inspire and influence differently. So we have to adapt in terms of organization. We have to focus on electronics because in Israel, for example, we have a lot of electronics to focus on. A lot of people will have said, this is not a market. I think, yes, it is a market, and it is much more a hub, a technological hub, when you have the possibility to connect to different countries. Today, in terms of geopolitics, for example, we see in the last period of time very dramatic change that's less boycott, less a big prestige coming up. And also in terms of technology-driven country, we are working by fact with startups. So the POC we are running, for example, are in line most of the time with the KPI, to answer the question, of the company. And also because we are taking also new measures in terms of, let's say, distancing, working, new facts that we are also talking about remote work will give us new opportunity of developing new kind of POCs and new kind of way to validate the POCs. So the continuous innovation we are putting in place in terms of partnership and very tight partnership between big corporate and startup. We are not seeing a startup as much as a competitors, but a kind of continuity, a kind of extension of R&D group from a big corporate. And this is the way we are now approaching the innovation. Here behind me, you can see the accelerator of ST that we put in place in Tel Aviv, in WeWork, Tel Aviv, having a kind of maker zone, can see here, can see this way, we have a machine for a touch machine to configure board, the evaluation board, and to give in the table here, you have the implementation table to the startup in order to adapt it. So most of the time they can do it and learn it by doing this, as we said before. I would have said there is no special secret sauce to be in Israel, and I do believe also to be in Singapore in order to succeed in Israel or in Singapore. But much more, as a French, I can say that much more the ingredients are more important than the secret sauce or than the recipe. You have to have this ingredient in your ecosystem. So I would have said to be bold, to try to risk. To be also local, I mean to invest locally in the country you want to invest in. And this is the way the principle of our model we're working in order to facilitate access, to accelerate the company or to collaborate with them. You have to be local and not to, let's say, to manage or to lead or to drive from an offshore structure. You need to be part of the system, to be part of to be a game player or a game changer, and to learn also from the academy. This is for sure. There is a lot of talent. There are a lot of talent in Israel, and we can make some academical exchange. But also in terms of future R&D, you will understand that doing this principle will give you a fact by fact a new approach on how to collaborate with Israel. But we have to be fast and flexible. And the Israeli population has it in DNA to adapt and to be resilient, as we saw before. But you have to be also very fast in adapting yourself and by practicing, not only by theory, but also by practice. So I would have said, and I don't want to be too long because there was a lot of saying about this accelerator. It was not easy to implement this accelerator as a corporate in Israel. But after 3 years and making a lot of POC, by the way, you can turn to the link, st.com. I would put it on notes, st.com/st-app. You will see how much the journey was very interesting in terms of learning for an MNC, a multinational corporation, and also in terms of startup to be very close and to see eyes to eyes at the same level, not to, let's say, to change the level of communication, but to be at the same level of communication and exchanging in technology. You learn a lot from the market. I think with this, I'm done. If you have any question, I will be happy to answer.
Terrific. Thank you, Stephan. Thank you so much. This was very insightful. And I would love to have, there are actually 2 questions here that were submitted before, but I actually think that are very much relevant to what you discussed about. How would you describe the desired relationship between business units and the innovation teams when it comes to setting KPIs and working on POCs? How do you see that?
It's a good question, but again, ST started from business in Israel. So you have 2 ways of approaching the market. Or you open a structure and you start to make business, then you are stronger in terms of innovation mistakes or POCs trial. Or you are starting with a new innovation center that a lot of are doing now. They are starting to scout, to screen, to measure the temperature and adapt. And then, so this is 2 different philosophies. We took the first one, building up a very healthy business during the year. And then we started by imposing our name to the market and creating this innovation accelerator for startup. Again, we address late stage startup, not early stage. So in terms of POC, they have also prototypes in their company. There are no more garage company, and they are much more, let's say, adapted to a corporate approach to R&D business units that are seeing them as an extension of their R&D or to fill the gap or in terms of technology of what we have. But in terms of KPI has to be very well defined from the beginning in order to, in order not to create expectation that we will not fulfill. Because sometimes the startups are saying, yeah, you have an accelerator, but as a big corporate, having an accelerator is not so easy. And some of the time you are not fulfilling our wish. We want to be much more, approached by your strategic partner, or to be seen as your collaborator, and this is very important. So I agree, KPI definition is important, but it also depends about the philosophy, about how you attack the market, and you have to learn the DNA of the market, to learn what is exactly what you have in front of you in order to attack the market properly. If not, it will be a misfit.
Yep. I think this is a great answer. This is actually relevant to both of the ways to be operational in Israel, both in terms of accelerator and maybe working with an innovation partner. Setting proper KPIs is something that is across the board very much relevant. I actually have a question. It's not on here, but it's actually from me that I would love to, maybe if you can elaborate, and maybe with that we will end. In terms of the organizational structure, like during COVID, I'm sure that some functions in the organization were maybe doubtful around innovation, maybe. How did you see your role as an innovation leader in actually getting them to understand that even though COVID has hit and hit hard, innovation is still a must, and it is something that you should keep pursuing?
I will say by vision, it has been decided before the pandemic. So the accelerator was creating as a pilot in Israel 3 years ago, and then we'll scale up this model to Europe. As you know, last year we had the fantastic event and Techno Days in Tel Aviv, when we announced that the STF will be deployed to Europe. So we were already, let's say, equipped to face this, if we can say, this crisis. But in terms of organization, we didn't change so much. I will say, when you are in innovator in spirit, when you are entrepreneur or intrapreneur inside a corporate, you know how to manage remotely. You know, Israel is a kind of technology island, as Singapore is today also. When we are an island, we have to know how to connect and how to act and cooperate before having a crisis. You have to adapt yourself. But again, it was built up as an organization, as a local entity, empowered entity. You know, you have to have enough empowerment in order to take the decision, because if you go each time to legal or corporate in order to make a move, you will not move locally. Right. You right. have to be part of the flexibility of the ecosystem. And this is right. where we, let's say, founded this program in order to be a kind of a very, I will say, you know, a small boat, kind of Zodiac, inside a big pack boat, like a big cruise vessel that is on the sea. And it is very important because you can adapt accordingly. So this was done before. It will continue after the crisis. And then you say there will be an after the crisis. And this after, you have to prepare it in advance to have the vision in order to say, this is the technology. Again, if we didn't adapt as a hardware company in the past, today is too late. You know, we have to take 3 years in advance, at least, in innovation for hardware. I would not say software, most probably. You can recompile your code overnight, but in hardware, you cannot relaunch wafer lab or fab overnight. So you have to decide in terms of technology much in advance in order to be set, to be fit in front of a crisis.
Yep. I actually got a request for a question from Bernard, the VP of Innovation at CAG. Bernard, if you want to open your mic, terrific.
Yes. Hi, sorry. I know we're a bit over time, Stephan, but I thought that since you're online, we wanted to ask you, sorry, I couldn't type in the chat grouping another panelist. Do you face any challenges in driving innovation during this period time, this COVID time, like whether it's like overall because finances are tight, innovation budget are reduced, or maybe even worse, the business units are a bit more like focused on their core business. So when you chase them for innovation ideas, it's a bit tough. And any advice there you have, maybe?
It's a great question, Bernard. I will have say, in order to be politically correct, I will not have explained all what my budget is. You can imagine it's a big structure, but to answer very, very synthetically and very honestly, when your KPI, and again, we are touching base with KPI, are aligned to the corporate one, so you can put your budget in terms of innovation, let's say, aligned to them. You have to be sure that the portfolio, for example, of a development or the roadmap, you have to fit the roadmap of the company. So if I would have said, I will go to my corporate and say, well, what is your pain? What is hurting you now? And he said, okay, I want to develop this sensor or this component. And I said, okay, let's adapt my KPI in terms of innovation of the market in order to answer your problem. And then I will not say we'll open all the doors and we'll give you an unlimited budget, but at least it will be much more pragmatic, and you can come back to the corporate management and say, okay, but at the end I want to answer your question, and it is vital. In tomorrow you will need this. So today you are looking at what is hurting you on day to day, but tomorrow you have a big problem if you are not in the field to resolve this problem. So it's a kind of I will not say prophetic approach, but at least to say that let's think together about the problem that you have tomorrow in order to eliminate the budget and have the minimum one in order to answer your KPI to face the future. And this is the problem that a lot of corporates have today. If you have to open today an innovation center in any country, it will be difficult because the budgets are squeezed. But tomorrow, you have to make this kind of compromise, this kind of trade-off between what you want to invest and where you want to invest. Sometimes, it's a big problem and big question, but this is the right time to show up and to say we are here to invest, because it is a very difficult situation that we judge the big manager or the great manager, and not only when everything is going very easy and very fast. Now it is the real test, it is the real exam. And I think if you want to innovate and if you succeed in this period of time, you will succeed everywhere and every time.
Thank you very much. That was great. Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks, Alper.
Terrific. Stephan, I think with that we'll end that part. We're a bit over time, so thank you for bearing with us and thank you for joining us today. This was definitely insightful, and I know that I learned several new things, not only about ST, but also about your innovation work and overall innovation work during times of crisis. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, I would like to kind of share a few closing remarks. So today we've heard from Dan, Aviv, and Stephan about the past innovation during crisis times, the current trends in the Israeli ecosystem, and Stephan actually concluded with specific insights from a multinational. And as Bernard said in the beginning, this is a part of what we now deem the innovation series. And Bernard explained in the beginning that we're going to touch upon three main themes, and so definitely pay attention and stay tuned, because we're going to come with more pragmatic and practical content, as well as introductions and pitching sessions from specific startups to fit your areas of interest, and hopefully we can generate a meaningful connection between CAG and Israeli startups, especially during this time, but also on the day after COVID. So thank you everybody for joining us today. You can reach out if you have any questions. I will definitely share the deck that you've seen today, all of the participants deck. You're going to be, I'm going to share that with you. If you have any questions that you want to forward to any one of our speakers, please do forward them to either myself, Bernard, or Trish, and I will be able to then get those questions answered, and even also connect you directly to the speakers if you would like that. So thank you everybody again, and with that I would like to end. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.